St. John the Philosopher here. Villains are kind of awesome, in their own way. Besides the fact that they seem to get the coolest outfits and the best lines, they're usually pretty important to good action-adventure storytelling. In addition, in my view, good villains are one of the most essential elements that define our heroes. As much as we admire Luke Skywalker's dedication to the light side, we can't help but be intrigued by Darth Vader's lust for the power of the dark side. Our identification with Batman's desire to restore order to the corrupt society around him is juxtaposed brilliantly by the Joker's self-appointed status as an agent of chaos. As hero and villain act and react to one another, we're not only given insight into who they are as individuals, but often we're also prompted to consider a larger philosophical question the story is asking. Now, it can be a really simple question about good and evil that should be easy to answer, unless you're a sociopath. Or it can be a complex question about the nature of reality that may or may not actually have an answer. Better yet, and I think audience responses show we really like these, it can be a bit of both, like whether people are essentially good or essentially evil. In light of all that, as an ardent fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Infinity Saga, thinking about how I might contribute to the latest video essay challenge to dig into a specific villain, my mind immediately went to Black Panther's nemesis, Killmonger. I've already done a video about the meta messaging surrounding this film, which I'll link in the description, but I haven't really talked about the film itself. Though, oddly enough, it's the meta more than the movie that made me decide on Killmonger as the subject here. Following its release back in 2018, there was a lot of praise regarding Michael B. Jordan's portrayal. People were calling Eric Stevens the best Marvel villain. For some, he had become a favorite, surpassing icons like Heath Ledger's Joker or Hannibal Lecter. On some level, I agree. He was pretty well done. As with many of the best villains these days, Killmonger came with just as much of a tragic backstory as any hero. His father was killed by his uncle, and he was left to survive on the mean streets of Oakland alone. But whereas the heroic version of Eric Stevens would have worked hard to make something of himself and use his abilities to help others, the villainous version allowed his conscience to choke on his loss and eventually die in the fire of his seething anger. Watching as that ship flew away without him was rough. And were he the hero, we definitely would have been rooting for him as he sought justice, or even revenge, though that might be a discussion for later. Having a flashpoint of understanding between the audience and the motivations of the villain are often key ingredients to that villain's resonance. And while I enjoyed Killmonger for what he was, I didn't quite understand why others were going so gaga over him. But then sometime later, in the midst of rising racial tensions, politically motivated violence in the streets, and the increasing prevalence of racial grievance-based philosophies running through the culture, I rewatched Black Panther, and I got it. People liked Eric because they had similar ideas as he did. Killmonger was the early face of the quote-unquote revolution, and no scene exemplified this more than this first confrontation with his cousin in the throne room of Wakanda. Killmonger carried a chip on his shoulder the size of an aircraft carrier, not only in regards to his personal tragedies, but combined with the collective grievances of all people of African ancestry across the globe and throughout the centuries.
Y'all sitting up here comfortable. Must feel good. It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder. Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all. Vibranium. Your weapons.
Our weapons will not be used to wage war on the world.
And in a world where a technologically superior African nation like Wakanda exists, there's a certain righteousness to his indignation, at least at first blush. As Wyatt Donegan, a writer for Medium.com, put it in his article/blog post entitled "Why Killmonger is the Greatest Villain Ever," why didn't they help us? Why did they just let colonizers not only kidnap Africans and take them to America as slaves, but also let them colonize a large part of their own continent? Yeah, they want to keep their technology safe and all, but surely they could have protected their fellow Africans and African Americans, right? But just as with the disaffected youths that burned down cities around the country for the revolution, These notions were woefully uninformed or misinformed about the realities of life everywhere other than Western nations in the 20th and 21st centuries. The movie itself speaks to this.
It is not our way to be judge, jury, and executioner for people who are not our own.
Not your own. But didn't life start right here on this continent? So ain't all people your people?
During the opening history lesson, we're told that the 5 tribes that attempted to settle the vibranium-laced land went to war with one another. A war that only ended after one of the tribes acquired the equivalent of a WMD in the form of a vibranium-empowered super soldier. And even then, the Jubari never submitted to the Black Panther's rule, preferring their own culture and their own gods.
Glory to Hanuman.
These aren't trivial matters. Both the would-be revolutionaries in real life and their fictional spokesman Killmonger made the same mistake as the European colonialists did, by shoving everyone of African origin into some generic monoculture. From there, they presuppose the existence of an overriding solidarity rather than recognizing the diversity of languages, religions, and traditions that form very deep tribal loyalties that come before any bonds of shared physical features. All people are not your people.
I'm not king of all people. I am king of Wakanda.
African tribes were made very wealthy from selling off members of rival tribes captured in battle. Slavery existed in Africa way before any European ship docked on her shores, and slavery has persisted there far after Western nations crushed the institution in their own nations, another truth the film acknowledged at the start. So much for solidarity. Killmonger's misguided views, and those of the modern revolutionaries in real life, have 3 things in common. First, there is an eminently valid point of injustice in the past that requires reconciliation. Second, there's an understandable emotional reaction to that injustice. And third, there's an entirely wrong-headed philosophy constructed in response to that injustice. Consider it this way. Killmonger's story in Black Panther is a dark mirror of T'Challa's subplot in Captain America: Civil War. Both men lost their fathers in tragic fashion and went on to pursue the killer. T'Challa found himself running afoul of the law, seemingly ready to take actions of questionable morality. But when he finally came face to face with the man responsible for his father's death, he came to his senses and returned Zemo to stand trial rather than continue to seek his death. Killmonger, on the other hand, essentially sold his soul to the devil, becoming a heartless killing machine for no other reason than to exact his own twisted form of justice and wage war on the entire world. Ultimately, that's the question being asked in both the movie and in real life. Are you seeking true justice or revenge? Is it truly that you want to demolish slavery, or do you just want your turn at the whip? Do you really despise imperialism, or do you covet the throne? The answers to these questions are the dividing line between heroism and villainy. Killmonger, as a really good villain, exemplified the latter in every way. I pray that the people who see themselves in him take a close look at what that really means. Tell me what you think of this video. What did you notice about Killmonger and his story in Black Panther? What other villains strike your fancy and why? Discuss in the comments. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more videos on religion, culture, and politics. That's all for today. Goodbye, God bless, and we'll see you in another video.